probably heard the story about Jonah and the big fish. Well, the book of Jonah is a small book, but it's a really good story. And so at the beginning in chapter 1, verse 1, Jonah is fleeing from the Lord. It says, "The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me." But Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed to Tarshish. He went down to Joppa, where he found a ship, and bound for that port. After paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. It goes on to talk about how as Jonah is fleeing, the crew and the ship, they encounter just so much hardship on the waters, and they try their best to get around this storm and the bad waves. And eventually Jonah just encourages them to throw him overboard and just get him out of there, in hopes that God would spare the crew. And so eventually they do. And as he's thrown overboard, God sends a great fish to swallow Jonah. And Jonah was inside the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. And so while inside this fish, Jonah is praying to God, and he is just begging for mercy and to be released from this. And he is just so sorry for what he did and not listening to God. And so as he's there, the Lord commanded the fish to vomit Jonah out. Super gross, right? But it goes on, and Jonah, remembering that God has saved him and the promises he made to God. In chapter 3, verse 1, "Then the word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. Go to the great city of Nineveh and proclaim to it the message I give you." Jonah obeyed the word of the Lord and went to Nineveh. Now Nineveh was a very important city. A visit required 3 days. On the first day, Jonah started into the city, and he proclaimed 40 more days and Nineveh will be overturned. The Ninevites believed God. They declared a fast, and all of them, from the greatest to the least, put on sackcloth. And it goes on, and eventually Nineveh is just converted over to being believers. So eventually God sees how Nineveh starts to follow him. And it ends with, right before chapter 4, when God saw what they did and how they turned from their evil ways, he had compassion, and he did not bring upon them the destruction he had threatened. And so had Jonah just done the right thing to begin with and just listened to God and done what God had called him to do, he would have saved himself a lot of trouble, and he would have saved a lot of stress and trouble on Nineveh. And so eventually he does do the right thing, and God is a forgiving and loving God, and he just says, "Okay, I need you to go do this now. It's time." And so what we can learn from Jonah is just how sometimes we, being human, we don't always want to hear what God wants us to do, what God says. And sometimes we're just more consumed in what we want to do, and maybe we're scared. Maybe we don't want to go towards destruction or towards hardship or towards conflict and confrontation. But sometimes God wants us to do what is hard, to do what is right.